Hey, Fanboy Nation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
You're watching.
We're watching. You're watching Fanboy.
Fanboy. Fanboy.
Fanboy.
Fanboy.
A fanboy, etc.
Fanboy Nation.
Dot, I assume Tom.
Horror never seems to stop, and people are always intrigued with the afterlife and beyond. And we are talking today with Michael Rangel and Aidan Sinclair about 57 Ghosts aboard the Queen Mary. Gentlemen, it is a pleasure to chat with you today about these events coming up.
Thank you so much for having us, man.
Great to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure to have you here. What is the fascination with human nature to worry about the great beyond? Whether it was early paganism, witchcraft, monotheism, and now neo-paganism.
Well, it's the one place we all end up, right? The great unknown. So it's that natural curiosity of what then? What becomes of us when our hourglass runs out? I think it's part of humanity, to have that curiosity of what becomes of us. So some people approach it through faith, other people approach it through mysticism, other people just go for the roller coaster ride and see what happens at that final drop. So I think there's always going to be an interest in the afterlife.
Now, 57 Ghosts is the two of you with this theatrical seance that's going to be aboard the Queen Mary. And for those of us that live in Southern California, or at least familiar with the history of Queen Mary, know that the ship is haunted. Take us through this experience of why only 57 ghosts. Is that the only number of people, entities haunting the facility? Or was that the number that people have the most encounters with?
No, we created the show around 57 Ghosts because there were 57 recorded deaths aboard the ship while she was in service. Those are the factual deaths that we know took place on board from 1936 until 1967. But the theme of the show really is about haunting and the idea that the entities that might exist on the Queen Mary and the experiences that you have there, they probably aren't linked to the 57 who died. They're probably linked to the thousands of people who sailed on the ship and lived. The idea of the show is really to acknowledge the fact that, yes, 57 people passed away on the ship, but literally millions of people sailed on that ship. And in those sailings, there are memories. And those memories are, people falling in love. There are people who had their first kiss on the Queen Mary. They met their wife on the Queen Mary, their husband, their partner on the Queen Mary. And if bad things like death make ghosts, then maybe good things do too. So it's more of an introspective look at hauntings and the idea of why things are there. Michael really delves into the conjuring of probably the most famous ghost of the ship, which is a little girl named Jackie, who has, kind of let herself be known for years and years. And people have had these amazing paranormal experiences with this little girl. But factually, we know that no little girl named Jackie ever died on the ship. We know that to be a fact. So the question becomes, if she didn't die there, why is her ghost there? And is that interaction maybe something much more beautiful than a tragedy?
And Michael, since you're the one that is doing the conjuring, is there ever fear of possession or, spiritual entities coming in and attacking you from that regard?
No, I've never had any type of fear of that ever since we got started. I mean, this is a theatrical seance. So we post that when you go onto the website, you see it as a theatrical seance. That being said, there are things that we plan to happen, and there are things that happen that are kind of, unexpected. And there's always something that unexpectedly happens during the seance that we can't account for. We don't tell you which is which. So I've never had a fear of having any type of demonic possession or ghosts following home. However, my fiance likes to light the Palo Santo every night after I come home before we go to bed and cleanse the whole house. So maybe it's her Latina upbringing. She doesn't like me putting her purse on the floor because she's afraid that if I do, somehow she'll stop earning money. Another superstition. So I guess it depends on how superstitious you are and how comfortable you are working in the medium, it's kind of been something that I've been drawn to ever since I was a child. And when you come see 57 Ghosts, you'll understand why. I tell the story of what kind of got me started into the occult and the supernatural and kind of walking down a darker pathway in my life. But this really isn't an experience where I feel like there's any type of dark spirits or demons that are going to come follow me or anybody else home. But it is something that has proven over and over and over again to be quite moving in an emotional level. We tap into that one thing that we all kind of share, and that's that yearning to make contact with our loved ones that have passed. We all have people that we've shared a connection with that raised us, that loved us, that comforted us when we were growing up, people that we miss terribly. And we tap into that, and we use Jack kind of a conduit to be able to speak to those urges and those needs that everybody has. And I think that's the universal denominator that we have here, is that everybody wants to be able to hold their grandmother one last time, you know, have their grandfather put their hand on his shoulder and comfort him, make sure everything's going to be okay, to see the loved ones again. And that's really what it's about, I think, is, like Aidan said, the people that lived on the ship, that celebrated life on the ship, not so much the spookies that people usually come looking for. They're there, but that's not the main thing.
All right, let's go back to Jackie real quick, since she was never recorded on the ship. Possible stowaway, possible local, you know, or rather didn't pass away on the ship. What if contact is made and she actually reveals her entire story? Does that ruin the mystery and the history of Jackie on board?
I don't think it does. I think there's a paranormal investigation on the ship as well that's ongoing, that has some really curious interactions with something in the pool that, you know, has identified itself as Jackie. I think there's a lot to Jackie that's really curious, and that, you know, is it a ghost? Is it someone who, you know, Jackie could have just as easily been a little girl who sailed on the Queen Mary, and for all we know, maybe she played Marco Polo with a little boy in that pool, and then that boy grew up and became her husband. You know, we don't know what the genesis of Jackie is. What we do know is that no little girl ever drowned in a pool on the ship. We know that to be fact. So the other question is Jackie even real, in the sense that, you know, a story was told about a little girl drowning in a pool, and people believe that story. And there are people who believe in manifestation, that the story has been told so much and so many people have come to believe in Jackie. Have we as human beings created Jackie? Have we, you know, has global consciousness kind of allowed this thing to manifest? And is it something like a tulpa? Is it something that we as people have made? And if we have done that, then what's your responsibility to that thing that you've created? So it's a very curious thing. I think there's definitely something on the ship that identifies itself as Jackie, but what that is curious. And for anyone to say, oh, it's definitely this, well, that's really an opinion. You know what I mean? Like, it's something that is beyond our knowledge. We can't know what Jackie is or who Jackie is. So all we can do is investigate and see what happens. And because she's such a powerful presence on the ship, she is a great catalyst for Michael.
Michael, forgive me if this is offensive in regards to what's going on with 57 Ghosts, in regards that it's half show, half seance, you know, that we can kind of equate it to professional wrestling. It's half performance art, half athleticism. You know, do you take us through the ship for what's going on, and it's almost kind of this 90-minute guided tour, or is it confined to one specific room where all this is going on?
Well, that's a good question. You see, it's kind of a little bit of a tour. We make a couple of stops in which I talk about some of the most famous deaths that happened, and some of the most famous ghosts that we see on the ship. And then we lead them down into the seance chamber, which is on the R deck. And they have this moment, I think, when they get down to the chamber, where all this kind of suspense is built up, and they're are waiting. They never seems like, and as soon as you walk into it, it definitely becomes the experience of the seance itself. It's definitely not a tour anymore. They walk into this incredible chamber with all these haunted antiquities on the wall, and they have music from the 30s playing on the old radio with the warm glow of the amber light from behind the dial. And they sit around the seance table, and when they sit down and we begin, it is 100% they're in the experience of a seance. And it's more of I think there's a precursor to the seance that's a little bit of a tour where we stop at a couple of places and I have a talk to them. And then once we get inside the chamber, it's all about the seance. It's all about the story of the 57 ghosts. It's all about Jackie. It's all about our kind of shared connection and what we have in relation to, we all miss our loved ones that have passed away. And I believe that everybody kind of connects to that universal denominator of wanting to have that last connection, you know, to be able to have a little bit of healing. And that's really what it's about once you get inside. And there's all kinds of things that people experience during the seance chamber, during the seance itself, once it commences, that is quite moving, both in an emotional way where people actually have shed tears, to quite chilling moments. And that's the exciting part, because we never know what's going to happen in each night. It's always kind of a little bit different.
Now, I've been on the
And
Queen
people
Mary
make
several. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Aiden.
Oh, I was gonna say, people make it really, really interesting as well, because every night around that seance table is a whole new group of humans and how they react to the things in the room. But really do run this emotional gambit from, you know, extreme skepticism and quiet to, you know, physical reactions. Michael's even had people like experience something and then just that was enough for them. They're like, I need to leave the room. I don't want to be here anymore. And we always provide that kind of parachute for people that, you know, if at any point it gets a little too real or you're a little uncomfortable, then we'll see you safely on your way. But it's amazing to see that happen, you know, every night, how the experience affects people and how emotional it can be for people.
And now
It's also incredible. Oh, excuse me. It's also incredible when the skeptics come in, usually tugged along by their partner who bought the tickets, and they're sitting there like this. And by the end of the seance, they're like this. And did you see that? Did you experience that? And they're walking out, and they're the most animated, and they're the ones that got moved the most by it, and they're true believers by the time they leave the seance. And that's lots of fun to experience as well.
Now, you know, the occult and the practice of the occult was rather large at the beginning of the 20th century when the Queen Mary was actually launched, especially in that era. Was the seance room originally part of the Queen Mary, or did you guys create a seance room for this experience?
We created it. We were given access to what was originally the tourist class, or what many people refer to as the third class dining room. All that's left of it is a very small portion. The room originally went the entire width of the ship, and it had been used during a haunt experience. And unfortunately, when they put the haunt experience in, it did a lot of damage to the room in itself, because the people who did the decoration, you know, they didn't really consider the historical significance of the room. They just saw a cool space. So there was a lot of, you know, let's make spider webs with hot glue. And that was done on historic mirrors and inlaid wood that can't be, you know, like that kind of thing is not made. So we literally spent about a month just demoing anything that wasn't original to the ship was taken out. And then we spent another month restoring everything that was original back to the way it was in 1936. And then laid new carpet and made sure that the wallpaper pattern that went up was period appropriate and that the carpet was period appropriate. And the table that went into the room was from the 1920s. And, you know, everything that has gone into the room, with the exception of the chairs that you sit in, are all correct for that time. So we were able to really create a place that was in disrepair and bring it back to life and restore it to something really cool. But that, I think, is part of the experience, is going back in time and going into that room and going, oh my God, this is what a seance would be like in the early 1930s.
And how many people are involved within the seance? Is it, 13, since that typically ends up being the magic number for something like this? Or is it a more intimate setting than that? Does each person get, I know there will be tarot card readings. I opted out of that because I don't like to mess with this stuff, obviously. But, does everyone get an individual tarot card reading, or a palm reading, or, tea leaves, flickering candle, whichever type of readings are available?
There's a lot to it. I'll let Michael explain. It's a really interactive and immersive experience, but it is also extremely intimate. Our maximum seating is 18, with most shows being 13.
Yeah, it's incredibly intimate, and I think people are really surprised once they walk inside how intimate it really is. Most shows around 13 people. We've had more people in there, like Aidan said, it does seat maximum 18, but it's something where when they do come in and we do start, there is some tarot involved, and I think that's very personal. It's really interesting how incredibly accurate the tarot is at describing a person, and I think we get a lot of emotionality out of the people that are in attendance when we do these readings for them. And there's a little bit more to it that I don't want to give away, but when you do come and you experience it, it's way more powerful than any personal tarot reading I've ever got from a tarot reader. And that kind of grows as we build a connection, and then we make our way into the dark seance. And that's the light seance, is about building a connection between the living, those in attendance around the seance table, and myself. And then once we establish that connection and make sure our energies are all on the same page, we make our way into the dark seance. And that's when we make contact with Jackie, or attempt to.
And so can you give us a brief description of what's a light seance versus a dark seance? Is this in, modality of, light in the sense of it's not so heavy, and dark in that it's a heavier sense, or dark and it's more occultish, versus light that you're leading into something hopeful?
It's actually a lighting description. Back in the Victorian age and the early 1900s, the Edwardian period, when seance was at its peak, there were two common presentations of what's called a light seance, in which the lights would be left on so that the participants can see everything and experience everything. And then traditionally, a dark seance was performed in a completely blacked out room. All the lights would go off, which, as you can imagine, there's a great history of fraud mediumship. And if you put a bunch of people in a room and turn off all the lights, you could get away with murder in that room. You could literally do anything you want. We've taken that to another level, so that when we transition into a dark seance, the room is never pitch black. The room transitions from a normal lighting into a red lit room. So the red lighting kind of creates the ambiance of darkness and allows for the manifestations to take place, while at the same time allowing all the participants to see everything that happens. So you're never completely in the dark, and you're always aware of your surroundings and what's going on, and you can see everything that happens, which I think makes it much more powerful. That at no point are you blind or, left in the unknown.
And now when we transition from the show aspect into the seance aspect, let's say it's a smooth transition from show to actual seance. Is there a night vision camera that will capture the events so we could see orbs possibly, or other things going on? Or is it so mixed that we can't tell which is real and which is show, that it would almost be like revealing a magician's secrets?
We leave it just to be lit and experienced live. So it's not it's not an event that we film or that you watch through film. What is curious is we have security cameras in the room, just because there's literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of historic artifacts in the room. So when we're not on the ship, we have to have security in there, and those cameras are constantly running. And what's curious is how many times I things moving in the room, or, you know, weird things showing up on the camera when we're not open. You know, that's really when it gets weird. You know, so we're like, hey, Michael, were you in the seance room last night? And he was like, no, I wasn't on the ship. And you're like, okay, thanks, because something was moving around in the room and there's nothing on the camera to catch it, or something's been moved, or the position of something has changed. So we catch that kind of stuff. The Grey Ghost project on board the ship that's doing paranormal investigation, though, they get some really pretty interesting things.
You know, with everything that's going on, and you know, since you guys aren't filming, let me preface this real quick. What about people with their phones and their cameras? You know, we got a 4K camera in our pockets right now. Do you guys take people's phones away so that they can be fully immersed and experience this? Because every once in a while, you're going to get the people like, I got to reply to this work email real quick because they can't disconnect.
In the beginning, we actually give them a moment to take as many pictures and video of the space from their seats as we get the chamber prepared. And I do a little bit of housekeeping, closing the doors, locking it, pulling the curtains, turning off the music, getting everything set. And they have time at the end of the seance to do so. But during the seance, we just ask that they silence their phones, put on a do not disturb. There is a point which we ask to borrow somebody's cell phone, and we take a video record of the chamber to be reviewed at a later time. And that's also when times we experience some interesting phenomena. Sometimes some glitches. Sometimes the videos get erased completely, which is really bizarre for an iPhone. But just last night, I did a special seance for a group, and they spotted orbs kind of flashing across the room, which is, you know, seeing that happen before. We've had other phenomenon, but we ask that people otherwise put their phones away and allow themselves to be immersed in the experience, and also have respect for the ritual of seance and for their compatriots that are joining them. You know, respect the whole process of it and be respectful of the people that you're with, because it is quite a beautiful and sometimes intense experience. And if somebody brings out their phone and starts doing an Instagram live, it kind of ruins it, not just for them, but for everybody else involved. It's, you know, people, for the most part, incredibly respectful of that, you know, which is really nice.
Now, let's move on to a little more personal aspect for the two of you, and let's stick to the Queen Mary itself. Aside from Jackie, what have been your most intense, to, I guess, use a generic phrase, haunting experience that you've come across?
Well, I've been working on the ship since 2018, and then the pandemic hit and the ship closed. And during the time that the ship was closed, my fiance Becca and I were a couple of the few people that were allowed on the ship when it was empty. So that alone is really surreal, to be the only living person on this massive ship. But we've had really strange things happen, like when we knew we were alone on the ship, of hearing footsteps going down a hallway. There's a big heavy steel door in one area that we work in quite a bit, that like it takes some muscle to open that door. And we knew we were the only people on the ship, and that door, we could hear it open and slam shut, you know, and then went running up there and there was nobody there. There's one door in the space that we literally saw just like someone shaking it, like trying to get out of the space, and we ran and opened up the door and there was nobody. An empty closet. So what was causing that, to this day, we have no idea. But there's also just these surreal kind of feelings of a presence on that ship. You know, it's those things you see out of the corner of your eye and you turn around, there's nothing there. And I think Michael, even in the limited time that he's been on the ship so far, has had interesting experiences just in the seance chamber of things that shouldn't happen that do, you know, and it's just, and that's really trippy. So it's a really amazing place. But I think it also takes a certain approach. When you visit the Queen Mary, there's a lot of people who go there with this idea of it being a spooky, haunted place, and they associate spooky and haunted with bad. And I've never felt anything bad on the ship. I've never been scared on the ship. I've never had an experience where I had the heebie-jeebies. It was always just kind of like, oh, that was weird. Or, you know, so it really makes me connect with the ship in the sense of, how special the place can be, you know. And Michael has his own family history with the ship as well, which is powerful. So I think those things make us a little bit more connected to the place as well.
And can you share a bit about that history, Michael?
Yes. So Aiden offered me this position a year ago, and it took some time for it to manifest and for everything to be set in place before we started actually working on it. And I started working on it in October, and I found out during that time I was staying on the ship. They put me up in a cabin for a couple of weeks, and I've actually spent about 3 weeks staying on the ship in preparation for this. As I was on the ship, I had found out that my grandfather, my Tata Joe, who my Nana Margaret and Tata Joe raised me, really did kind of save my life from going down a really dark path. I found out that my Tata Joe was one of the main bartenders on the Queen Mary when it opened to the public back in 1971 in Long Beach. And that was a powerful moment for me because it kind of brought everything full circle. And it made me feel like instead of having the heebie-jeebies or being scared or worried, that I was coming home to my Tata and my Nana every time I would come to the Queen. Like it felt very, very familiar and very warm. And there's some interesting things that have happened inside the seance chamber for me. A piece of antique twine that I use for one of the pieces inside the seance, and it was missing. I keep it in the same place every night. I have a checklist that I go to make sure everything's set for the next evening. And when I went to get it, it wasn't there. And I called up Aiden, and Aiden was in Colorado at the time. And I said, Aiden, did you put the twine someplace? Because it's not where it's supposed to be. He said, no. He said, nobody's been inside the chamber. I would never do that, he said. And he has the alarm with cameras, so it's armed and it tells you whenever somebody goes inside the chamber. So I was frantically looking all over, and I had this feeling to check the trash can. We have a little trash can to the side, like a side stage area, seance chamber covered by curtains. And I went in there with a flashlight and looked, and there it was. Not only was it in the trash can, but somebody had tied a knot into it, so it was in a circle, which is really kind of chilling in a way, but also kind of comforting. And it made me feel kind of like, okay, I could see how people could come into the space and really be moved and sometimes be scared by what's happening. But for me, because I have that connection to my grandfather, it made me feel warm, kind of like he was there with me. And also Jackie, you know, there's this connection to Jackie that I've developed since I've been doing this, where it feels like, oh, you're just playing again. You know, very oftentimes people will put their jewelry on their nightstand or on their counter when they're spending the night on the ship, and it will go missing. When they wake up in the morning, it's not there, and they'll find it as they search the cabin, kind of tossed in the corner on the floor as if a child had been playing with it over the evening. And it's kind of that kind of playful type of warm feeling to me that I get, that, you know, somebody that's you're familiar with is kind of saying hello, you know, and reminding you that they're there.
So touching upon it real quick, the tying of the knot wasn't a bad thing. It was just kind of like someone letting you know that they were there.
Yeah, because
like it wasn't a malicious thing.
No, I think that it was more of a playful thing, and kind of like if they wanted it to be gone, it would be gone, I think. of just reaffirmed that this is where I'm supposed to be. And that's how I feel every time I go to the Queen. I feel very warm and very, very welcomed. And I think part of it is how we approach the whole seance with such respect for all these spirits and respect for the Queen. And, you know, it's an honor to be there. It's an incredible feeling to show up to work at this beautiful ship that was the greatest sea vessel on earth for all of its time. And now we get to go there and we have this history with it. And, you know, it's like a dream come true for me.
Now, I'm going to ask this question. I don't think anyone's asked you this yet, or probably will. Let's take the two extremes. You know, has there been anything, let's put it in the quotes of malicious, happen with guests where either on the far extreme in one end, someone that is a Satanist wants to come and conjure up the devil at the seance, and then someone on the other extreme end, say an evangelical Protestant Christian, that wants to come with holy water and exorcise the ship?
We actually see both of those extremes pretty regularly on the ship. The seance experience, though, is pretty restrictive in the sense that we want it to be a positive experience. So we kind of, you know, deliberately discourage or disinvite either of those extremes. You know, if somebody showed up at the seance and said, hey, I'm here to conjure somebody, we try to make very clearly that the show is not about the departed that you bring with you. It's not about your ghosts. It's about the ghosts of the ship. And really try to convey that, you know, if you're trying to reach out to your grandmother who, you know, made you chocolate chip cookies every week, that if you want to talk to her, you should probably go to the place where she might be, which is probably not the Queen Mary. So the conjuring of spirits is really more focused on the theatrical and on the idea of what could be here. However, that being said, there is a moment in the show where we do, you know, kind of like to be able to give that experience of like, this is why people went to seance, and give somebody an opportunity to revisit someone departed. But we do that in a very positive and respectful way, so that you're visiting that person at a moment when they were the most alive and not at the moment of their passing. And there's a lot of conditions to participation in that piece of, you know, we really kind of encourage someone that if you're recently bereaved, if you've lost somebody in the last 6 months to a year, don't do this, because it takes time to heal. It takes time to say goodbye. And Michael really tries to discourage that, you know, that participation at that, within that window. And we also try to encourage people that if you lost somebody to a traumatic or a violent death, you know, that if someone was taken from you before their time, this probably isn't a good piece for you to do, because it's hard for you to focus on a happy memory of someone when they're stolen from you. But we try to bring someone back to that positive moment, and Michael's really, really good at it. And it's honestly one of the more emotional pieces of the show, is to show where that connection can be, and that the connection is most often found in good memories, not bad ones. So I hope that answers that question a little bit.
It does, but it leads to the next question of, you know, take us through the people that are on either extremes that show up on the ship that either want to conjure the devil or want to exorcise the ship.
Truthfully, I hate to say it, but we will usually ask them just to leave. You know, it's just, that's not what we do. It's not what the ship is. On the one extreme of someone who's, you know, very evangelical and Christian, they generally don't buy tickets to begin with. You know, like, it's just not their thing. But still, there are people who do that, who will show up and, you know, with a Bible, or they feel like they have to profess a religious belief. And it's a show. If you know, it's the evening out is for entertainment. And for the person who's extremely dark, what's really amazing to me is the polar opposites of the two extremes. Is that the person who shows up to the show who has got a pentagram around their neck and is dressed in black and has eyeliner on, they tend to be the nicest, kindest, most respectful guest we see. You know, it's the 50 to 60-year-old woman with a certain particular haircut and a name that rhymes with Sharon. You know, those are the people that tend to be horrible. You know, we're just like, you know, you can go. just be nice, just, and because it is such an intimate experience that, you have 13 people around the table, and all it takes is one really negative person to destroy the experience for everybody, to make it a really unpleasant time. So we kind of safeguard against that. Michael does a very good job of reading people when he first introduces himself and checks people in for the show. And he's very good at knowing who the show is appropriate for. And if you get somebody in that moment of introduction before the show's even begun, we're usually, very professional at what we do. And we're able to go like, this probably isn't for you. And we'll usually pull that person aside and go, hey, this maybe isn't for you tonight. We're going to go ahead and refund your money, and you should probably find something else to do with your evening. An extreme example of that is when we first launched the show, we had a woman that had 6 hours just to go to this thing. And we have an age restriction of 16 and up because it's meant for a mature audience. But that being said, we can make exceptions from time to time. And on that night, we had a 12-year-old boy who showed up dressed in a suit. This is a very mature kid who took it very seriously. And his parents reached out and were like, hey, this is something our son is very interested in. And he'd really like to go to this. Would you make an exception? And we did. And unfortunately, there was a woman who showed up and was very confrontational and said, well, I thought there was an age limit on this. I said, there is, but we've made an exception for this young man tonight. And she responded by saying, well, I'm not going to be comfortable and I'm not going to be able to enjoy myself if there's a child in the room. And our response to that woman was, well, now that you've said that, we would be comfortable and we wouldn't enjoy ourselves if you were in the room. So we're going to go ahead and let you go. And you can drive 6 hours back to wherever you came from. And we'll give you back your money because you're mean. Don't be mean. Be nice. So we want it to be a positive experience. And if somebody comes with energy that's negative, then that's going to affect everybody. So we try to screen that out before the experience begins. So inevitably, we won't catch everybody. There are requirements that if you're attending the seance that you be of sober mind. So we produce this event at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado as well. And it's inevitable that, a couple of times a year, somebody will show up who's had a few too many drinks. So we're not going to let you in the room. We're not going to let you, ruin the experience for other people. So hopefully for your guests, that assures them that if they do come out, they're paying for a very exclusive experience, and it should be a wonderful experience, especially with the amount of money of it. So we want to make sure that they get what they want and that the experience is genuine and good and positive. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And it actually answered my next question, which was why 16? Why not 18? Why not 21? Why the specific age group?
It's really more directed at a certain maturity level. The majority of the show is narrative and it's storytelling. So if you have there's not a lot of people that are 12 that can sit for 90 minutes through something and soak it in. It's not to say that there aren't 12-year-olds that can. There are 6-year-olds that can, and there are 16-year-olds that can't. So we have to draw a line somewhere and go like, this is probably the most age appropriate, but it's definitely more of an adult experience. And under 16, as a producer, I don't want to be the person that introduces a young person to the idea of death, and the subject on any given night. We don't know what's going to come up in the room. So, people might want to talk about suicide. People might want to talk about some pretty dark things. And I always feel that that's a kind of a parent's place to make that decision. So when we have somebody that has someone under 16, they generally will reach out, and we get two types of emails. We'll either get an email that's confrontational of like, I think this age limit is ridiculous, and my 9-year-old would enjoy this. And if the tonality of the email is hostile, that tells us all we need to know about that person, and we'll probably say no. But if we get an email from somebody that says, hey, my son or daughter is 12, but really watches Wednesday and is really into paranormal television and has a sincere interest in these things, then chances are we're probably going to make an exception.
I'm very
you,
confused
know,
with
they're
the
like, "Oh, you're
hostility
probably our
towards
people."
something. Yeah,
It's weird.
like let's say, like I don't want, the tarot thing is not for me. So when we
Yeah.
decided to do the interview, I already told the PR team I'm going to opt out of the tarot thing, but I really want to talk to you guys. All
Yeah.
right. Why would I come at you hostile? I don't believe in tarot and I'm not going to do the tarot
Yeah.
thing. And what's the point? There's no reason for me to talk to you then if I'm going to come at let's even remove all this out. Like, let's say I hate roller coasters.
Yeah.
There's no reason for me to go to Magic Mountain and complain the whole day after spending X amount of dollars to get to Magic Mountain. I
Yeah.
just
Well, I think
don't go to Magic Mountain.
Yeah.
I think it has a lot to do with who the person is, and these are the same people. We've all been to Starbucks where the baristas are just trying to do their job, and these people are just berating them and yelling at them for no reason. And these poor baristas come in every morning and work their butt off to be able to give people the best quality coffee and drinks that they can. And here this person is just trying to make them feel like crap. And it's kind of the same type of person that would do that. They just have that hostility and anger inside of them. And luckily, Aiden's been very good at being supportive that if we find somebody like that inside the seance, we just ask them to leave or not take part and say, it's just not for you. And that's a wonderful thing.
And it's not for everybody, it's just, and we recognize that as a business, that our product is for a certain type of person, that would enjoy that. And we want people that go to it to enjoy it and to have a positive experience, and that they leave the room wondering about the ship and wondering about the afterlife and wondering about this historic place that they've chosen to visit. And I think those people leave not only with this amazing experience, but also with memories that they will have for the rest of their life. But because it is an intimate room, there's 13 to 18 people in a show. Most people come as a couple. So there's an interesting dynamic when you have couples that go to a show, is that you'll have the person who bought the ticket is really intrigued by it. But there are couples that have parity where both people in the couple are into the same thing, and they both come in really excited about it. But Michael every night will have a couple of people in the room that, like, their wife or their husband bought the ticket because they're really interested in it, and then they just kind of got dragged along. And what's amazing to me is watch the person who got dragged along go from that, like Michael was saying, they go from that really withdrawn, arms crossed, this isn't my thing, I'm just here for my partner, to by the end, they're the one leaning all the way forward going, oh my God, this is cool. So it's nice to see people have that dynamic. So I think if you come out to 57 Ghosts, it's just have an open mind and be open to have an experience. And I think it's like anything in life, you get back what you put into it. If you go in, with enthusiasm and excitement, and you're like, wow, curious, then you're going to have a great time. But if you come to a show, and there are people for some reason who do this of like, I have to be here. No, you didn't have to buy the tickets. Don't buy those tickets. Please don't. That's why we were really excited to do this with you. Was like your people are kind of our people. Like they were the people who follow you are people who will probably really enjoy this event, and they're really incredibly kind people who like to go out and do theater and experience life, and that's what we want on the ship. So
Understandable. And, I appreciate you guys talking to me. Michael, I do want to ask you this, because my experience with seances are, quote, movie seances or TV show seances, where the person doing it has the crystal ball and they start doing the, these like transcendental dances almost, and then they channel a being. How does it work for you? Is there any channeling going on, or is it, Michael is fully cognizant while this is happening?
No, I'm fully cognizant while the whole thing is happening. And
I mean, if you want a belly dance, that's up to you, but
well, that costs extra. That's a upsell charge. Just kidding. It's really more about the storytelling and the narrative and setting the tone. And that, when you come to the seance, I think people oftentimes are kind of caught off guard at how personal this is, and how strong storytelling plays a part in this. And that kind of sets the tone as we take them down the rabbit hole of the ritual of the seance. And as people are kind of drawn in by the storytelling, and we start to do the different pieces within the ritual, you see that it's not cheesy at all. It's quite elegant and intimate and personal, and people are just really drawn in. And I think that's the power of 57 Ghosts, is when people come, they have this preconceived notion in their mind for what they've seen on TV with the crystal ball and, you know, the kind of black light figures that they see in the dark floating in the air, or whatever it is that they've seen before on TV or maybe in person. And this is really it's about the storytelling. It's about the shared experience. It's about really trying to communicate the message that the spirits are here, not really so much because they horrible death, but maybe they're here because they lived an incredible life aboard this ship. And in turn, maybe they're here to tell us something and remind us of how precious everything is, not to let these moments slip through our fingers, you know? And that's, I think, makes it a profound experience. And when people leave the chamber at the end of the seance, it's so gratifying because they're so grateful, want to shake my hand, especially the skeptics that come like this, you know, and they're sitting there, and afterwards they just thank me, and just thank me so much for the experience, number one. And I think for kind of gives them a different perspective on what a seance is and what spiritualism was. And that's the most gratifying for me, because not only are they grateful, but I thank them for trusting me at the end of each seance and for sharing their intimate secrets and intimate experiences that they shared with their loved ones. And that's a bond right there. People share things that they don't share with anybody, but they come in, and by the end of the seance, they feel comfortable enough to do this. And it's a really beautiful moment and can be quite cathartic, I think.
Gentlemen, I'm going to leave you with this, because I was a fan of learning about Harry Houdini when I was younger, and his big thing was spotting the phonies when it came to these seances and spiritualists. So since you guys are deep in the world as it is, how do we spot a phony in modern time, especially when technology has become so advanced?
I always say that anything that looks too good to be true probably is. You know, if it feels a little off, it is. You know, and we live in a world where there's an immense amount of information that's out there, and unfortunately, that's where we see a lot of fraud still today in mediumship. Of, you know, people spend a lot of money because they've suffered a loss and they want a connection, they want to say goodbye, they want to they want to have that moment to ask a question that they didn't get answers to. And there's a lot of people out there that to this day will still take advantage of them. And some of those people become very famous and make a lot of money on TV doing it. And we always try to encourage people, you know, to be careful. You know, one of the things that we tell people a lot is that, and it'll happen on a weekly basis, where either I'm doing the show in Colorado or Michael's doing it here, our other magician Hannibal is doing it, where someone will approach us after a show and say like, hey, do you do a private reading? I really want to talk to so-and-so. And what we generally tell those people is that if you want to talk to that person, go to the place where you feel the closest to them. And nobody in this world knew that person better than you do. So if you have something to ask them, you have something to say to them, go to the place that you feel close to them and ask them the question. And you will know the answer. It'll come to you. And what I always try to tell people is that, you know, if the most commonly asked question for people is usually these days, are you proud of me? That's what a lot of people want to know of their departed, you know, especially if it's a father figure, mother figure, because there's something in that question that is unresolved, right? You know, like they feel, you know, unsatisfied with the passing, that nobody ever told them, hey, I'm proud. And my answer to that is always the same. And it's always that if you live your life in such a way that would make them proud, then you know that in your heart and soul. And in asking that question and seeing that knowledge, then you're going to know that. But you'll also know the answer is negative, and that if you're doing something in life that would make them ashamed. And then that spawns a second question. And the second question is this: is that your baggage or is it theirs? If the thing that would make them ashamed is that you're, smoking crack every morning and then robbing banks every night, then yeah, you should probably address that and live your life better. But is the thing that they're ashamed of your personal lifestyle? Are they upset that you're, the way you live your life is different from the way they live theirs? And especially in today's society where, if the shame comes from maybe the fact that you're in a same-sex marriage, that's not your burden to carry. That's their baggage. That's their shame. It's not yours. So if you're happy and you're living your life in a way that makes other people happy and you're doing positive things in the world, then you know that. But if you know you're doing horrible things, you also know that. So I think people know the answers to those questions. And sometimes they just need that affirmation to know that, hey, you're a good human. Just do that. Just be a good human. And sometimes people need to be reminded that they are a good human, and that sometimes the baggage people carry is not their baggage, it's somebody else's. And sometimes you have to help people put that baggage down. And that's what's nice about this, is that sometimes people are able to look at their past and go, you know what, I'm okay. So that's the way we approach it, or at least we try to.
I dig it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today talking to me about 57 Ghosts. 57ghosts.com. It's the number 57ghosts.com. Also on social media at 57ghosts, the number 57. The show, according to the website, runs till the final weekend of February. Will there be an expansion, or has it not been updated on the website yet?
It just hasn't been updated. The show will be running indefinitely Friday through Sunday, at least as far as through 2024 until the next year. So those shows will be going live here on the website pretty quickly, so that you can schedule as far out as June, July, August, and so on. As we get into peak season in the summertime next year, the show will be running 5 days a week instead of 3. So there's more opportunity to see it. But at the moment, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights, come on out. We'd be happy to have you.
And will there be a special Valentine's Day edition of 57
There
Ghosts?
will. There will indeed. There will be a Valentine's Day show.
And how does that differ than the regular show?
We'll probably focus a little more on Valentine's Day instead of Jackie being the catalyst, but the Lady in White, very famous ghost of the Queen Mary, who's seen quite a bit. And people have all these different ideas. Is it somebody in a white dress who committed suicide, or is it a jilted bride? It's amazing to me that people go to the negative, but when you look at the Queen Mary, even to this day, if you go on that ship on a Saturday night, there's a wedding happening. And when you think of the thousands of people who have fallen in love and been married in that ship, my idea is that if something bad makes a ghost, then maybe something good does too. And maybe that's what heaven is spending eternity in the one moment where you were the most happy. And isn't that what your wedding day is supposed to be? The happiest day of your life. So maybe that's why that Lady in White's hanging out on the ship. So it's the tonality is more about that partnership and connection. So hopefully everyone will enjoy it.
Gentlemen, thank you again so much for your time. Michael Rangel, Aidan Sinclair, 57 Ghosts, 3 nights a week on the Queen Mary this summer, expanding to 5 nights a week. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you about 57 Ghosts.